Questions like, why are we here? What happens when you die? Where did we come from? And is there a God?
The U.S. government has been shown to have had a long-term interest in Scientology.
This is a practical question here.
I know this is an illusion, or dream, or call it the way you want to call, you know?
We are a bigger threat to the people who are secretly trying to control this planet than any other group on this planet.
But the problem with an atheist is he believes that his belief is based on fact.
Oh, it's wireless. Yeah, you got wireless one.
He's impressive. He's a powerful guy.
I can't make this shit up.
The leaders of this are not just after our church, they're after the whole of this planet.
He was put here to work out his own salvation. And we feel in Scientology that we've made a very big stride in that direction.
Howdy everybody, and welcome to the Indie Scientology podcast. I'm your host, Andy Nolch, the Space Cowboy, and isn't it lovely to be here listening to the good old Strauss. This is the podcast that has everything to do with the interesting world of Scientology. Yes, that odd religion you might have heard about. If you don't know what Scientology is, then I'll tell you. It's a bunch of self-help books and mind exercises that evolved into a religion created by American sci-fi author L. Ron Hubbard in the 1950s, and I think it's quite interesting. Today's guest interview is with Scott Gordon. Again. How did you like the last show with Trey Lotz? It was good, wasn't it? It was interesting. You know, it's not as epic as Scott Gordon is. Scott Gordon's he does some pretty crash hot interviews, and today's interview is a pretty heated one. If you want to go down the rabbit hole, then listen to this one with Scott. The former OSA director. Oh! It's now time for us to go down that rabbit hole into the interesting world of Scientology, where up is down and down is up, where left is right and right is left, where what you thought was impossible is possible. Welcome to the show on this Wednesday, the 1st of May, 2019. Yes, welcome. Let's start off the podcast with an independent Scientology success story. Now, I don't know where this came from, but here it is. The auditor audited me for an incident that occurred when I was young. The incident caused a scrape on my back. I have had an open sore there for many years. Often people told me to leave it alone and quit scratching at it. I told people, by the way, this success story isn't coming from a cat. Oh, that was a bad joke. Sorry. All right, I'll start that again. The auditor audited me for an incident that occurred when I was young. The incident caused a scrape on my back. I have had an open sore there for many years. Often people told me to leave it alone and quit scratching at it. I told people I hadn't scratched it, but it was open. After the auditing session, I went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up, showered, and I noticed the sore wasn't there. I went into the bedroom and asked my husband to verify it wasn't there, and he did so. I firmly believe the sore was caused by the incident. After running the incident, it was gone. Wow. Talk about synchronicity. That's this what I just read then relates to what me and Scott talk about during the interview, unless it's in part 2. I don't know, this is part 1 of the interview with Scott, but I think it's in part 1. But we start talking a little bit about time travel and is it possible to change the past, and we talk a little bit how auditing changes something, so maybe it's time travel. Anyway, it relates to what this success story was mentioning. Very relevant. And I didn't plan that. So that's synchronicity. It happens all the time. All right. It's now time for the post of the week. This is from the Advanced Organization of the Great Plains. And it was posted a few weeks ago now. And it says, org board postings have begun at AOGP. Posts now occupied are Executive Director, Deputy Executive Director, Executive Establishment Officer, HCO Internet Technologies Director, Online Course Room Director of Training, In-Org Director of Training, Flag Trained Pre-GAT Senior CS, and an actual fully ordained Scientology chaplain. That's kind of cool because people can go there to get married and stuff. Anyway, LRHED org program number 1 is actively being applied and exec secretaries are actively being recruited. It is really happening, as one staff member stated yesterday. Yes, it is. The very positive adventure begins. Cool. So it looks like the Advanced Organization of the Great Plains in the middle of America is kicking butt. Good on them. That's great. That's cool. Yes, there is a place where you can go up the bridge and not be forced and controlled into becoming like a perfect little church member that's Mr. PR. You can go up the bridge and you cannot have your own personal integrity violated. Obviously, if you're smoking crack pipes every night, then you might get denied services, which I think is reasonable. But if you're doing something like avoiding paying a speeding fine because there's speeding cameras everywhere and Big Brother's getting set up and you're trying to resist them, you won't get asked to pay your speeding fines. Otherwise, you're not going to get auditing. Some bullshit like that. And that's what's great about the independent Scientology field, where it's just much freer. Like, you just don't have these controlling rules and stuff that actually force you to be who you are not. Yeah, it's good. And anyway, I was going to say something, but I don't want to go off topic. But it's a part of granting beingness, really. But yeah, I mean, my experience with being audited independently was just like persistent FN. And I don't even think I ever had that happen when I was involved with the church. There's so much crap that's going on in the church. I mean, the church is in bed with the government pretty much. So you're just getting Big Brother when you're going in with the church. Also, there's cells operating within the church, and what cells are is when an intelligence agency group like CIA or something like that, they go and they infiltrate a little bank, and just a few staff members are like a little cell operating within that bank, but they're actually for the CIA. That's like what a cell is. And they're little cells operating, I think, within the church. And so even if you don't believe in the conspiracy theory that the top management of the church is taken over by the government, you still might come across cells being they're operating, and they might even be doing mind control experiments within the church. And that's what this superpower machine might be or something. Like, you never know. Like, there's a little cell. Like, of course, the CIA would be like, this is great. There's this cult going on, and we can operate a little cell inside it, and we can experiment certain things. And if anything backfires, then it'll just be the cult that gets blamed. You know what I mean? And it's hard to get a group of people together and send them off to a camp and do mind control experiments with them. It's just much easier to infiltrate a church and do funky stuff. Anyway, once you understand how intelligence agencies work and what's going on in the world, things make so much more sense. You can see how you can see how things are just interesting. All right, it's now time for a Scientology joke. What's the difference between a fox and a dog? About 8 pints of beer. All right, it's not a Scientology joke, but I just threw it in there. It's that time of the night. Sorry, the time of the day. Because the Indie Scientology podcast is a day thing. It's an afternoon at St. Hill. That's what the Indie Scientology podcast is, with classical music. It's time for today's guest interview with Scott Gordon. And this is the longest interview I've ever done, but I split into two. But in total, it was 4 hours and 13 minutes of just boom, hardcoreness. But actually, the last hour fizzled out a little bit, to be honest, because we were getting tired. But no breaks or anything. No internet connections got cut. And actually, what's kind of funny about that is that I was doing it in a whole different location in Australia. So, of course, there isn't a problem with internet cutting out and all that stuff, you know, because whatever system they usually use to try and interfere, they couldn't do it because I was in another part of the country and maybe they didn't expect that. But yeah, that tends to happen a lot. I have problems with the interview stuffing up, and you might not notice them because I edit them out. But anyway, what'll happen is I'll be doing the interview, and then the internet will cut off, and then we'll have to start. Like, we won't have to start the interview again. We just continue where we were, but it just creates a bit of a stuff up and makes more work from editing. But anyway, I only realize that now. It makes sense that there was no stuff ups when I was using someone else's internet, someone else's house in another part of the country. Of course it works just fine. Anyway, look, you're going to really like this first half of this interview with Scott Gordon. It's just, wow, Scott has that ability to just open up cans of worms like there's no tomorrow, and I almost want to go down all these little paths. But yeah, this is gold. This is epic. Let's dig into this, chuck on a pot of tea, and let's hear some talk about the world's most interesting and controversial religion, Scientology.
After all, we haven't been invited, and curiosity often leads to trouble. Goodbye, Dinah. Goodbye.
Today's guest interview is with Scott Gordon, the former Office of Special Affairs staff member. It's been a while since I last spoke with him, and a lot seems to have gone down in his universe. So let's get to the bottom of all this. Scott, are you there?
Hello, Andy. Great to be on again.
Great. It's good to speak with you. It's probably been a year and a half since I've spoken to you.
It's actually almost 2 full years.
Wow. So, yeah, I mean, and I was seeing some of the stuff you were posting on the internet, and I was just thinking, well, there seems to be a lot going down in your universe.
Yeah, there sure is. And it's not even stuff I want to do. I really far prefer auditing and the tech. But I feel that there's some fundamentals that are out in the field and in the whole fundamental basis of Scientology and of rebooting Scientology that if we don't get a grasp of, I'm afraid we're not going to be doing it right.
So are you still auditing people?
Yeah, I still am.
Okay, and so, but you've been doing other projects like your free Scientology stuff?
Yeah, free Scientology is sort of a research project, and it's also one of the top goals is to reboot Scientology so that it is very easy for people to access and understand. And I plan to have it fully compatible with Hubbard Scientology, as in standard tech practitioners who want folders and, session notes that can be, used to continue programming cases if they want to go the Hubbard Scientology bridge route. So it's not that dissimilar. It's just that there are several things that I feel will make Scientology more free in all senses of the word, as far as deleting all control aspects, as far as what I feel and some others feel go too far, and worked in the church and in that context, but don't really work in the field. But other than that, it's highly similar. We completely advocate the grades and a thorough job on the grades. And actually, sometimes I find myself at war with so-called Hubbard Scientologists who are more and more abandoning the bridge in the sense of not emphasizing it, not emphasizing training, things like that. So sometimes I find myself to the other side of different Hubbard Scientology groups as you look at them. So I'm trying to play the middle of the road or the middle path, I should say. Middle of the road's not a good term, but middle path as far as not going into extremes or not. We definitely don't ever want to see it become a cult again, in the sense that it can't be easily accessed by the common person and used to improve someone's life from any walk of life.
Okay, so how about to start off the podcast, you just define what your Free Scientology is? Like, it's a website or it's what? Just define it.
Okay, well, Free Scientology is basically it's several things. It is a website that offers new looks on the philosophy and the application of technology. We've studied expanded Dianetics in depth and found that and the L's, and found that really helped clarify approach to cases. There have been a lot of rigid interpretations of Hubbard Scientology that I feel have gotten in the way of a new person or a person who's not indoctrinated into all the language and culture of Scientology, that just make it far easier for them to just get going on a co-audit and do the processing on all of the grades. So that's basically what Free Scientology is in a nutshell. And for people in the freedom, truth, and justice movement, which I'm also linking up to, it is basically an inner work that does not involve any of Scientology's control mechanisms or cult type policies and mechanisms that unfortunately continue to linger in some of the independent Scientology groups. And I don't fault them for that. I just want to take the lead and pave the way for a more, just like Wise did with the business tech for Scientology enterprises, and made it easier to apply without where someone didn't have to be indoctrinated into the religion of Scientology and could actually use it on the job. In that sense, we're doing a very similar project with the auditing, and so people can co-audit without a whole lot of training and at first without a meter. So that's what Free Scientology is.
Okay, and what's the website?
FreeScientology.us is the central website. It's not really the one that has the most on it, but it will give you all the links to the material I've been putting up. So I always intend that to be the core site, FreeScientology.us.
Okay, and if someone wants to get audited by you, do they go to that website?
Probably best to look me up on Facebook, where I have all of my personal data, including email and phone number and things like that.
Okay, and that's interesting, because that's sort of almost, that's one of the things I want to ask you about. I mean, what's happening with Facebook suppression and you getting shut down on Facebook? Like, I know you said you've had some posts banned, but are you getting whole accounts wiped or anything on?
No, I've never had trouble with my account. I've never, harassed anybody or spammed anybody. So personally, I feel pretty safe that I'll be on Facebook as, personally, but I have tried to introduce material into various groups, both Scientology groups and Freedom, Truth, Justice groups, and they have been banned. In particular, I'm talking about the MikeMcLowry.wordpress.com material, which has exposed a lot of things that are both good and bad for the Hubbard Scientologist from that perspective. First of all, Hubbard lied about his war record for a good reason. He was deep cover agent, and he couldn't talk about it. And a lot of these books, again, anti-Hubbard books, really hinge a lot of their criticism on Hubbard. They invest everything in that, and it's just not true. And the evidence is coming out that Hubbard did quite a bit. I mean, it'd take a long time to explain, and we may want to go into it. But for example, Hubbard was on in the Atlantic Theater, involved in the Normandy invasion, and that's never come out except the church has shown a war medal for the Western Theater of War, which has always been a mystery to me because I remember seeing it when I was in the church. And I thought, well, Hubbard was over there in France, but then he never talks about it, and you never see it in any of the biography. So Mike and McLowry have uncovered evidence that he was indeed in that theater, and of course there's a medal to back it up. But the anti-Scientology movement has invested a lot of its, it's stable data as far as why Scientology is bad and why Hubbard is bad in the whole, well, he lied about his war record and he was just a wimpy guy who wanted his war injuries fixed, and they weren't even from real battle. That's what they said. And that's starting to fall apart, and that's making a huge difference because they invested so much in it, and people are getting very upset over that stable data coming apart. And it may also be possibly upsetting the government's plan for Scientology because they've been involved and interested in Scientology, and they don't like this data coming out either. So we get a lot of strange gaslighting events and Facebook censorship and attacks from people who are supposed to be against Scientology, and that this should somewhat support their thing that Hubbard was backed and aided by his intelligence connections throughout the early developing years of Dianetics and Scientology. So you would think that this group that wants to take out Scientology would jump all over it, but they're attacking it too. So this is why it's led me to conclude that there is a far more significant and higher up third party, as we might say, at work in controlling a controlled opposition. You have David Miscavige and the church and people who can't do anything as far as get on the internet and find things out about Scientology. And then you have the other side who is being controlled by Tony Ortega and Karen De La Carriere on Facebook. And they're not allowed really to investigate this material. So it's strikingly similar. It really is a controlled opposition where you have two cults fighting each other and saying that this is all that Scientology is. There's no outside special interests involved whatsoever. It's just a dumb con artist who was good at hypnotism, has come up with a clever religion that got us to pay our life savings and join staff, and we're just dumb for doing it. That's a Chris Shelton narrative.
Yes, that is a good point. I mean, it's how the powers that be operate, where they control both sides. They control the people who are fighting Scientology and make those people just think that it's a cult set up by an evil guy, and then the people who love Scientology and they're just like they're trying to control all the church members and the people who are pro Scientology into thinking that it's just like this religion, and like basically the truth about Scientology isn't known within the church. No one really actually understands the topic of Scientology, and the church members are not really Scientologists. You know, like they are followers of LRH, but like they don't really know his history. They don't really know the inside baseball. They're not the best Scientologists. They're like only really half Scientologists, and give it 2,000 years and they'll end up being like, no offense, but Christians, mainstream Christians who, I mean, they're not even really Christians because it's gone so far from what Jesus meant. I mean, we have no idea what the hell Jesus was really on about.
That's a great point. And there you can see controlled opposition has been playing for a long time in the Christian church. And I grew up in the Christian culture, and I met a lot of different people from different denominations, some very high up Christians. And I got to observe a lot of that. And I've seen the same pattern. And you look at some of the Christian universities and their seminaries and things like that, and their information is tightly controlled too. It's a very tightly controlled culture, and it's geared, or it's curved in the direction that the powers that be want Christianity to be, something that's really submissive to government and does not really throw the money changers out of the temple like Jesus taught. Things like
Jesus was a super rebel, because I'm reading something about Jesus at the moment. It's the second time I'm reading it, and the first time I was clearing heaps of words, and now the second time I'm still clearing heaps of words, and it's almost like you're reading it anew. And I know more about the story of what really happened to him on the cross, right? And it's so complex, and it's just like, I don't know, my understanding of it is that Jesus was like almost like leading a coup to take over the Israel government, because he didn't like the way things were being run, and things were corrupted back then like they are now, and he was basically trying to take over the government with him and his disciples, and they were super hardcore rebels, but they were really cool. I think that they were good. The evidence is indicating that they were good. They meant well, and but anyway, we just don't know the truth about it, you know. Like back,
yes, and I actually think I've thought many times for many years that Jesus and his disciples were actually practicing some form of tech that has been lost that helped and healed people, both mentally and physically.
Yes, yeah. Jesus was teaching them how to heal people. Yeah, his disciples, he was trying to train them up. There's little stories about that.
In a sense, Scientology, because it came up against the medical monopoly, has been one of the first major movements since Jesus' time where people can actually treat psychosomatic illnesses and help people with the mind over the body. And, let me point out very clearly that Hubbard never said to ditch doctors or to completely scrap medicine. He basically, and there weren't those kind of policies. Even if there was that kind of behavior amongst rebel Scientologists that, for me, for example, I didn't learn this from Hubbard or from Scientology. I was that way before I came in Scientology. I don't like doctors. I don't like modern medicine. But I still, if somebody has a medical problem, the policy is to straighten it out through medical means and use auditing to supplement. But I've also seen auditing do some very powerful things physically and spiritually and mentally. And I think auditing is valuable practice and it shouldn't be lost.
Absolutely. And it's unique. I mean, it's even unique when you compare it to some of the sort of squirrel groups or the practices that have been started by former Scientologists. They're sort of similar, but there's still definitely a difference. And that's why it's like there's all these other practices, and, I like yoga and stuff, and that's unique, and Scientology is its unique practice, and there's nothing that's like it, I don't think. And so it's just like, it's really cool because you can do that, you can do this, you can do that. Then you end up handling so many of your dynamics and you're part of your case and all this stuff, doing all these different alternative forms of therapy, and then you become a whole new being.
Absolutely. And, that's what I just described was Dianetics, and that's one half of the auditing, and the other half is the repetitive processing, which is, even if you don't believe in the spirit, these are startlingly incredible exercises for preventing Alzheimer's, for exercising the mind, for getting a new viewpoint about life, for just coming out of boredom. So, people that don't really care about the spiritual aspect, the repetitive processing and the self-analysis and the things on the grades are incredible mind exercises that really do spiritual things. But if you don't believe in that, it still does incredible mental things for your mind.
Yeah.
So that's the other half that we really are fighting to preserve in free Scientology.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a skeptic, you can go, I'm pretty sure, like up to clear, and it's not like you're really going to be violating your skeptic beliefs. I mean, it's not that funky, Maybe the OT levels are funky, but really, the objectives is pretty straightforward. It's just like you got a person and you're training their ability to be awake and be there. So you get them to touch the wall over and over again, And then you do the grades and they talk about some emotional issue they have with their mum or something like that. And it's just like, it's straight, standard. It's not that wild and out there at all.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, even though I do believe in all the wild and out there stuff because there's much more going on, but skeptics can totally do it. So we got onto the topic of Jesus, and I got some stuff I want to ask you about that because, and this is going into a controversial area and potentially upper level data because I want to ask you a question about something that could be associated with OT8 and could actually be written by L. Ron Hubbard. Now, I don't know if it is, right, but it could be. So I just want to give a warning to anyone who's listening who doesn't want to hear something that's connected to OT8. We'll talk about it for the next few minutes. But you wrote some comments on my YouTube channel, so I want to basically ask your personal opinion about that Jesus document on OT8. What I think that there's I guess three things that it could be. It could be real, it could be altered and tampered with to give Scientology a bad name, or it's could be completely made up, completely fabricated, and someone tried to write a document that seemed like it was by L. Ron Hubbard. What do you think that document it is?
Well, I first ran into this as the director of special affairs because people would come to me and ask me, is that document real? This is what I read on the internet. And of course, I had the standard OSA response that the document was a forgery from the Fishman Declaration, which was a court case that entered all of the OT levels into the record. And from that point on, they were available to mankind, although nobody knew about them until the internet came on and they were webbed on the internet.
Now, hold on a second. Just out of curiosity, sorry, can I ask this? With that Fishman thing, do you think that he intentionally did that with his court case so that he could, like he didn't really need to bring these OT documents into the court case, but he intentionally did it to try and fuck over the church because he was annoyed with the church or something like that?
I don't know much. I can't speak to that because I don't know much about the Fishman case.
Okay.
I've heard the guy talk. It's a little bit, he's like a fanatic Scientologist, but he was also very intelligent, so I don't really know.
Yeah, he's strange. I mean, when you listen to him, you're going into dangerous territory because he is an SP. He's spent time in jail twice, I think, and he exhibits lots of 1-1 traits. But if you listen, you probably listened to that long interview he's done, have you?
Yes, I did.
Yeah,
I found it very strange myself.
Yeah, I found it extraordinarily entertaining. But the problem is, if you start listening to that, it can start throwing confusions into things, and he's a 1-1, so he's gonna confuse you by slipping in true data with false data and stuff like that. I went down that rabbit hole.
I didn't really pick up that was his intention, but he did have some really serious core beliefs that were kind of disturbing, because he really believed literally a lot of things, a lot of the whole track space opera stuff, and he was obviously very restimulated on all that and very interested in it. But I found a lot of tidbits of truth in there that when you connect to these other dots, which is really what needs to be done more by Scientologists, is connecting multiple sources, which LRH incorporated into his multiple viewpoint management system as a way of getting a clear and accurate picture of a situation. And of course, you're going to use the data series as well. But so I don't automatically reject everything a so-called SP has to say. L. Ron Hubbard's son, for example, was himself a bit of a criminal. He did criminal things in the Scientology organization, and I think even later that didn't define his existence, because he became a Christian and he came clean and honest, and he testified at the Clearwater hearings. And his testimony there was very sane and very believable. But he also interviewed with Penthouse and made some really extreme allegations on his father. So I don't take everything that he has to say literally, but I also don't go the other extreme. The dead agent thing, to me, is not a very good use of logic. It's used in time of war. You know an agent is bad when they lie, and you don't rely on their data. But if you have time to sit back and evaluate data, which you should, a lot of these guys have things that you may have one whopping lie, but the guy says a lot of things that are important to strings to pull, words of the data series, that you can connect to other things and can actually give you a pretty accurate picture. So it's important that Scientologists stop engaging in single-valued logic. Yeah. Because Hubbard told us to, even though he did himself many times, unfortunately. But we can't afford to engage in single-valued logic. If someone is unreliable or unbelievable to you, that doesn't mean that everything he has to say is a lie. It just doesn't. Yeah, and even own scale thing.
Yeah, things aren't that simple. They're not just black and white. So, but the thing is that, unless you're willing to, do a proper evaluation of what Stephen Fishman's data, because he's written some books as well, it's kind of like if you just listen to some of it, you can get confused by it. Like, you have to go in there, listen to the whole of the interview, investigate further what he's saying, then listen to his book to try and understand what's going on with that guy. But his interview is one of the most exciting things on Scientology that I've ever listened to. I mean, it's just like, it's a long 3.5-hour interview or something, and it's like, whoa, what the hell? Like, the shit he says, and it's exciting, and it's like back in 1989 or something, and it's just interesting. But I think I'll just say, if you're gonna listen to him, you've got to do a proper evaluation. You've got to listen to all this stuff to try and understand what he's saying, and pick the moments where it seems like he's putting in intentional lies, and other moments where he's just misinterpreted things and stuff. But anyway, you were talking about how people, when you were in the Office of Special Affairs, you were the what's it called? The head of it? What's it called?
The Director of Special Affairs, yes. The DSA.
Nice. So people had in the church had come across the Fishman document, and they'd read about the Jesus stuff, and you were saying how Fishman entered these documents into the courtroom, right? because somebody must have somehow, I don't know, I wonder, maybe you know, how did Fishman get his hands on these OTA materials all the way back then?
Well, he says in his interview that he was bringing in so much money for Miscavige that they sort of let him into a kind of an inner circle where he was allowed to do some of the upper levels and see some of the upper levels. And apparently he got his hands on them and copies of them and smuggled them out. And so he had them in his possession when it was time to go to court.
So, yeah, okay. So continue what you were saying about handling people who had read this Jesus document.
Okay. Well, basically, I used the church dead agent pack and basically said that Fishman had forged it or made it up, and it was entered into the court record along with other OT levels, and that it simply was a forgery. So it was flatly denied by Scientology attorneys and RTC. So that was their way of backing out of that embarrassing issue.
Yeah, and it's embarrassing because it says some stuff about Jesus, and actually it's a mind-blowing document, really. I mean, I just find it so incredibly mind-blowing because I know stuff about Freemasons, and they believe, I think, that Jesus was bad or that Christianity is bad. They believe in, like, Lucifer, you know what I mean? Like and that Lucifer was actually good and trying to bring light, and Jesus was trying to enslave people or something like that and turn you into a sheep or something. Right? Have you heard this? Yes. Yeah. It's interesting.
Yes, and I'm aware that the Freemasons have similar beliefs, and it's the Fishman document or the OTA student briefing is strikingly similar to Freemason beliefs and documents.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's like if this is what the Freemasons discovered about Christianity, maybe Hubbard discovered a similar thing about Christianity. You know, obviously it's completely out PR, just so out PR. Like, and that's why the Freemasons don't want people to know, like, what the upper levels is. And if this is a part of actually Hubbard's material, that's why it would be completely censored, because it's like, no, you can't say that about something that's so popular as Christianity, you know?
Right. Now, we might want to take a moment to look at a very interesting detail here. Bill Cooper, who wrote the book Behold a Pale Horse, which was banned by the church in writing, was a naval intelligence officer.
Why would the church ban that?
That's a good question. I think my answer right now is that the church has some connections to intelligence agencies, very limited. Obviously, the common Sea Org member, even the OSA staff member, isn't aware of it. But I'm almost sure that David Miscavige is in on it, and maybe some others.
Are you saying that the church actually didn't like its members reading that book by Bill Cooper?
Yeah, it banned that book, and it also banned William Bramley's Gods of Eden.
What? But hold on a second. Both of those books, they don't even talk about the Church of Scientology, do they?
No.
Yeah.
And William Bramley had been involved for some years in the church when he was younger, and obviously the powers that are involved in Scientology do not want those two books to be read, especially by Scientologists.
Okay, so now I'm really interested in hearing this, right? So you're telling me that, like, some church member reads these books or whatever, and then ethics, I mean, how, ethics officers, like, how would the church even find out that someone's read this book? Like, how do they police a rule like that? I'm just interested.
Well, when the issue came out in around 1997, I looked at it on the bulletin board and I thought, well, hey, I read Bill Cooper's book, Behold a Pale Horse, and I went straight to Qual, and I turned myself in, and I said, Qualsec, his name was, I don't remember his name. I said, I read that book that's on the issue out there. And he sat me down and had a little interview with me. And he said, that's not a big deal. Thank you for telling me about it. Just carry on, and he gave me a very sane handling. And I wasn't in trouble or anything, but it was just that I had already read it. It was like I hadn't violated the order knowingly, but at that time I was trying to be, cross my T's and dot my I's and be a good Scientologist. So I went in there and said, hey, I read that book, Well,
what was their reasoning for it being banned? What did the document say?
It didn't go into the reasons. It just said it goes into squirrel or, upper level material and they always put it this way. They say fragmentary knowledge of upper level material. That's how they do it. And they even say that about the real OT levels on the internet. So that's how they handle it for the church Scientologist. You're not supposed to be looking at fragmentary OT level data.
It's interesting because that's why you get this idea when you're involved with the church that you just do Scientology. You know what I mean? If I was reading funky books like Gods of Eden, you could just imagine somehow one of the church members that you're hanging out with will say something like, "Oh, you're just wasting your time with that sort of stuff anyway. It's kind of squirrely and stuff. Like, just do the OT levels and you find out the truth about aliens and stuff like that."
Right, which is not even really true. You don't get a whole lot of cosmology on the upper levels, unless you go into Captain Bill. Captain Bill remedied that lack of data himself, on his own. So I don't always agree with Captain Bill's take, but I really appreciate his sincerity, his loyalty to Hubbard, and I think he was shooting straight, but he might have been a little diluted and not quite accurate in what he was talking about. And I don't really agree with his approach to case handling regarding the upper levels, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to fight about it or knock people for doing it. I think people have done those levels and been very happy with them. So I don't quibble with that.
Well, anyway, what I'm trying to say is that's why there's this attitude in the church that it's like you only do Scientology. Like, they're very one-eyed. It's like, and I know there's a lot of materials in Scientology, so that keeps you so busy. But the thing is that you just don't get much comparable datums, comparable magnitude of datums, in order to get that proper understanding. And you don't get as much mass. But now I understand why, when I came on into Scientology and stuff, why there are these sort of attitudes towards other data. It's because there was some policy that was released 10 years earlier saying don't read Beyond a Pale Blue Horse or whatever because it has a bit of potentially OT data in it. But you know what I mean? You know how it all makes sense now when you find out more of the history, you're like, oh, I get why there's sort of these themes in the church.
Yeah. Exactly. It's censorship and it's secrecy, and it's the consequence of secrecy, which is why Free Scientology has completely thrown out all policies of secrecy, including on the upper levels. Not that we're advertising or giving out upper level data. We're not even involved with that. But the whole secrecy thing has just backfired. And Hubbard wrote a brilliant essay on what's wrong with secrecy in the opening to Dianetics 55, and I would encourage Hubbard Scientologists to go back and read that and compare notes with what's happened with the upper levels and how many people have ended up suicided, dead, in serious trouble, accidents, things like that. All those things on the upper levels, you can trace a whole lot of them to secrecy, and by that I don't mean that if they had known I am saying that if they had had a broader picture and had been able to talk about these things and get these things openly sorted out, I don't think those tragedies would have happened. basically a lot of the suicides that I've read that involved people on the upper levels who got attacked by the church or whatever, or just a bad handling at Flag, boils down to they had no one to talk to because literally they knew that they would be declared and expelled for talking about it. And then the church didn't give them a terminal to talk about it. So a lot of those cases trace back to secrecy. It's just not a good thing. And Hubbard said so in his own words at the opening of Dianetics 55.
So, I can't remember, we're talking about the two books that were banned in the church. And what you were saying makes sense because it's like the powers that be wanted to suppress those books. And it shows you, if the church was a part of suppressing those books, it shows you how the church has been infiltrated by the powers that be.
Right. And what I was about to go into, and just a quick overview, is the connection between Freemasonry, intelligence, and Scientology.
You're talking
Bill
about.
Cooper
he was a Navy intelligence officer. So that was you were saying about Bill Cooper.
Yeah, and so was L. Ron Hubbard. So Bill Cooper points out that you cannot be in naval intelligence or any other kind of higher intelligence service without a grounding in Freemasonry. And he had been a member of the De Molay Society in high school, which is a very light introduction to Freemasonry. He didn't get the whole initiation and stuff. And so he was kind of lucky. He had a flair for intelligence, and they just kind of let him go on that basis. They said, well, that it's kind of like there's a prerequisite, and you have something similar, so they let it slide, okay? That may have happened with Hubbard because he did a correspondence course with Rosicrucians in California.
I was just about to ask you about that because I had a bit of knowingness about Hubbard having some sort of connection with Rosicrucianism. I might have heard something once, but I also went off a bit of intuition and knowingness. It was like, yeah, Hubbard's been exposed to some of those materials or something. But how did you hear that he's done Rosicrucianism? Where'd you get that data from?
That's actually on the record. Somebody uncovered that in biographical research. I'm sorry, I don't remember which author at the time. However, it's my suspicion that Hubbard did get a thorough initiation in Freemasonry, and he even talks about it in a lecture. And this is in one of Mike McLaury's articles, but basically he found a lecture in which LRH basically said that his uncle, who is a master Freemason, walked into the org one day, took a look around and said, you know, you did a pretty good, and I don't know which org, he wasn't specific, it was probably the Washington, D.C. org in the early days, and basically walked out. He was a Scottish Rite Freemason, and he turned to Hubbard and he basically said, wow, you've really done a pretty good summary here of the knowledge. And by the knowledge, he meant the Freemason knowledge. So Hubbard knew Freemasonry, and I studied a little bit of it, and there are some things that have been incorporated or borrowed from Freemasonry, but I don't see a whole lot either. I'm not saying that Scientology is a knockoff of Freemasonry at all. I'm just saying that Hubbard knew Freemasonry, and he had to, because that is the religion of intelligence agencies. It's basically their religion. Even though you can be of any religion and join the Freemasons, there's indoctrination in the Freemason levels. And they're kind of ironic that Scientology has its levels as well. But there's a lot of other good reasons that Scientology has levels.
Okay, but I want to get from you how you think that Hubbard has actually studied Freemasonry.
Well, I refer to that lecture, and I don't have it in front of me now, but it's in one of Mike's articles.
And what's he
saying?
I
had seen the lecture before myself because I've heard a lot of LRH lectures. I just didn't take I didn't think to note it down at the time, but
what does he say in that lecture?
Basically, he's talking about his uncle, who was a Scottish Rite Freemason.
So that story, yeah, but the thing is that in that story, that just because Hubbard came up with a religion that might have a lot of information in it that's similar to Freemasonry, that doesn't mean that Hubbard's studied Freemasonry. That just means that he's discovered the truth.
Well, when you really get into Hubbard's intelligence background, I think that he was privy to a lot of high-level intelligence data, including the Nazi research and the whole thing around the Nazis, both anti-Nazi and what the scientists themselves had come up with and brought into America through the paperclip operation, and a lot of things about mind control and knowledge of the mind. And I believe a lot of it. I can't prove it. It's my belief that people who are that high in intelligence have a very thorough grounding in Freemasonry.
Well,
because Bill Cooper basically pointed that out, and it's Freemasonry is the first and foremost, most natural intelligence organization on planet Earth. There's a lodge in almost every town in America. There's a lodge in almost every major city on the planet. So Freemasonry is the way that the elites do pull off some of their stuff. They have people who have taken an oath and will do some things, and they don't have to know why they're doing it, but it's just basically they do favors for the Brotherhood. And that goes a long way to global control.
Yeah, Freemasonry is quite, I don't know if it is now, but it was definitely back in the 30s. I mean, that was when it was much more popular than what it is now. I mean, it was more normal for everyone to know a Freemason, whereas in my generation, I mean, I don't know anyone who's a Freemason, like as in of my age group and stuff, but it was more normal back then. It seems to have been, as a movement, sort of shut down a bit, because I know that around Melbourne, you just see buildings that used to be Freemason centres and they're not anymore. And it kind of reminds me how the Scientology movement got infiltrated and shut down. But I mean, you look at the US government, like Washington DC, and you look at Canberra in Australia, which was set up around 1901, and it's just got Freemason symbolism everywhere, and it's just so similar, And then you look at the Nazis, and they were basically started and sort of pushed by a secret society. It was like a secret society getting their guy in control of a country. And it seems like in Germany, Freemasonry wasn't as popular, but the Thule Society or the Vril Society or whatever they had was popular. But back then, it was like these things like Freemasonry and the Vril Society were like big things, like big minority groups, right? Now I think they're smaller. But the New World Order has increased in power, though. But all the way through, though, you had the masses that were into just Christianity, but it seems like the influential secret societies were big. But, so with Hubbard, I think that he studied Aleister Crowley's religion, the OTO. I think he studied Rosicrucianism. And I think that he might not have actually studied Freemasonry, but he was hanging out with probably Freemasons, and he was hanging out with intelligence officers, and they would have just dropped data to him that was like high-level data. You know what I mean? They would have said, oh, hey, by the way, you can, I don't know, move objects with your mind or something like that. And so Hubbard would have got secrets, or maybe he stole a book or something about Freemasonry secrets or something, And so he would have exposed himself to the secrets of Freemasonry.
Right, and it's my opinion he was indoctrinated in his teenage years, because he first got a hold of Crowley at age 12 after his trip with Commander Snake Thompson through the Panama Canal, where he learned all about the mind and all about Freud. And Commander Thompson was a naval intelligence agency and agent and a Freemason, and he took Hubbard to the Library of Congress, according to his son's testimony, and started getting into Crowley. And Crowley was definitely into Freemasonry. Crowley was a MI6 agent, as that's come out in books, and he was a sort of a model agent for somebody who was both had one foot in the world of spiritual technology, which was kind of creepy, very creepy actually, and another foot in intelligence work. And that's still a tradition to this day. It's not that all agents are into both Satanism and or Freemasonry and into political change. Both. A lot of them are just clerks that are very intelligent and analyze data. But some of the highest level operatives are very steeped in advanced spiritual knowledge, whether it's the dark arts or just the run-of-the-mill Freemason levels, which can get dark depending on which kind of group that you're in. I mean, there are good Freemasons, obviously, and it's not inherently bad or evil. It is, as you said, infiltrated, and it's a brotherhood with a very powerful secrecy oath that makes everything else looks like it's the secrecy oath is every bit or more than a mafia. It's like you're going to be killed if you reveal the secrets of your brothers.
Yeah.
It's made very clear.
Okay, so we went a bit off topic, but you were saying how we were talking about the Jesus document and how staff members come up to you and they've read it and you dead age at them and you say to them that this is all made up, right? And then, so did you find that was back in the past when you were the director of special affairs? But as time went on, what did you find out about this OTA document? Basically, if anyone doesn't know, it's not actually how to audit OTA or anything. It's just like an introduction briefing to OTA, and I found it extremely interesting. But go on.
Yeah, that's important to point out. We're not talking about the auditing of OTA. It can be safely dispensed with. Nobody needs this document to get through OTA in any way, shape, or form. It might indeed be a forgery. I'm not going to rule that out. But I'm going to give you a few things why I think it's authentic and why it's in LRH's hand.
Wow. This is getting exciting. Because so far out of the people who I've interviewed, a lot of people seem to go with that it's not authentic, that it's just black PR that's been slipped into the church to give Hubbard and Scientology a really bad name because, I mean, you read it and you're just like, whoa, it is just totally out. It's the definition of out PR, just completely. And if you wanted to try and give Scientology a bad name, you would parade this document around and say, hey, this is what Scientologists really believe. Because you got the Xenu thing, which the Scientology haters love to parade around and go, oh, Xenu, even though it's not that big a thing, but they go, oh, Xenu, can you believe they believe Xenu and all this stuff? But it's like the real one that's really groundbreaking is this document we're talking about.
Okay, and I want to emphasize that I'm open to the fact that it's not authentic, but I have some dots that I've connected that point to the fact, give it a strong case for being authentic. And I'll start with the first thing that I encountered, and that was the Jesse Prince affidavits. He had entered some affidavits in court in the 1990s where he talks about playing racquetball with David Miscavige before the maiden voyage of the Freewinds. David Miscavige was very dejected and very upset, and Jesse Prince asked what was wrong, and he said, there's this document on OTA there. It's just going to ruin everything. It's going to be a big problem. Now, think about this. At this time, David Miscavige was, a brat, a young man. He was a true believer in Scientology. If he's not now, he was at that time. he was extremely enturbulated, as we say in Scientology terms, extremely concerned and upset at the prospect of releasing this along with OT8 on the maiden voyage.
Okay, well, hold on a second.
Okay,
hold on a second, because before we go on, because this you've now mentioned David Miscavige and what his idea is and stuff. He's tricky to work out, is he a real Scientologist or not? He seems to be an SP. He seems to be a classic SP where they want power and control and all that sort of stuff. I don't think he gives a shit about true Scientology. I think there's evidence that shows he doesn't really care about Scientology and that sort of stuff, but he does care about his group, him having power. And so from his point of view, he would say, no, this document is bad because it could ruin his ability to take over the world, because these power-hungry CEOs and stuff, they don't want someone stuffing up their CEO position. So I think that the reason why he was concerned about this document being released is because it's threatening his control, because they're obsessed with controlling and being the king of the world. They actually voice this sort of shit if you talk to them in private. They want to take over the world and be king of the world. Anyway.
That's a common human foible, unfortunately, that when people get absolute power, they get absolutely corrupt. And that's what happened to David Miscavige. But I want people to roll back in their minds to a time in which David Miscavige made it to OT7. He actually did a confessional with Jesse Prince where he was squirming, upset, fearful of losing his job. These are not the characteristics of a sociopath who has no feeling or emotion or no remorse for his crimes. And I'm not saying David Miscavige expressed remorse. I'm saying that he got a sec check from Jesse Prince and it brought out real crimes. He was not able to hide them from Jesse, which indicates to me that at this time he was not a full-blown SP. He was not somebody who was completely criminal, completely out for power. He was definitely a guy to be reckoned with, a powerful young man, and a ruthless and brutal young man, to be sure, when he was crossed. When it came to power, he was going to win the fight. But this is a long time before the corruption that we see in present time. So I want people to get the idea of a gradient scale of how I've looked at David Miscavige's background in depth for a long time, and at this time, and you can go to Ron Miscavige, his father's book as well. At this time, David Miscavige was a true believer, and he was extremely concerned about the release of this document.
Okay, well, hold on a second. I want to make this clear as well, is that... go ahead. I'm just trying to say, because people will look at David Miscavige, and especially church members who only see the good things he's done, and they say, but he's good, see how he's helping the church? And it's just like, no. Overall, he has a negative effect on Scientology, and overall, he is an SP, right? And of course he's going to do things to help the Sea Org. You know what I mean? Because he wants to take over the world, if you know what I mean. Like he wants to have all that ultimate power and stuff. Because people will be looking at it, and I don't know why. I think it maybe we think that an SP is like this wicked witch that's like always evil, but it's just like no. He has done some things to help the Scientology movement, and yes, maybe he saw this document about Jesus and he wanted to get rid of it, but that doesn't mean that he's not an SP.
Yeah, well, I would agree, but I also want to point out that that this document itself, I think, started to breed resentment in David Miscavige toward L. Ron Hubbard, and because it's that computation that an SP has. Oh, he made my life hard, or he made my job hard. He wasn't what I thought he was. All these motivators that David Miscavige, Marty Rathbun spoke at length on his blog about different events that pointed out that David Miscavige was anti-Mary Sue Hubbard and eventually became anti-L. Ron Hubbard. So in present time, David Miscavige is covertly anti-L. Ron Hubbard and resents L. Ron Hubbard. I believe that totally.
Okay.
But at this time, I believe he still had some things that he was working through, and he hadn't gone completely keyed in, full-blown SP that's seeing, Martians behind the bushes like he is now, where he's drinking lots of scotch and things like that. At this time, he was just trying to be a ruthless, tough executive in Scientology like everyone else in RTC.
Yeah, and he was trying to forward Scientology in his own aberrated way. Like, in his own aberrated way,
Exactly.
he thought what he was doing was right. But anyway, continue about this racquetball game.
Okay, so Jesse says that David Miscavige is extremely concerned, emotionally depressed. He doesn't want to release this document. He thinks it's going to be a disaster. Later on, and I'm going to jump forward because that was my initiation into this whole thing, and I'm going to talk about a few things. But I want to stay on the topic of Jesse Prince because Jesse Prince has written a book, and Jesse Prince doesn't have that same affidavit in this book. You'll have to find that on the internet. But he does have a lot of peripheral information about his relationship with David Miscavige, and it's a relationship of trust. And it was also a relationship with Ray Midoff, who became the senior CS that released OT8. And both Miscavige and Midoff showed him the OT8 briefing or spoke of it. I'm not saying they showed it to him because they said, Jesse, you're still on OT7. You don't get to see this. Okay? But they did refer to this document. They said, oh, man, you don't want to see this kind of a thing. And he talks about it in his book that it was part of the first release and that David Miscavige and Ray Midoff came back from the ship and said, man, what a flap. It was a big disaster. Okay?
And that first, you're saying the first voyage of the ship, right?
Right,
and
the release of OT.
And that was maybe the first 100 people who did it?
Yeah, and I've listened to Trey's interview, and I completely, get that Trey was there a month later, and that he saw lots of success stories on OT8, and that he was on the ship when the maiden voyage, and he saw the success stories. I have no problem believing that too.
Yeah, but it seems
some
like
people
it seems like Trey was like the second round of people who did it. You know what I mean? So he didn't get the document.
That's right.
But the first round of people got the document.
But he was on the ship and he heard the success stories. So he said he heard a lot of great success stories. And I don't have any problem believing that. A lot of people make a lot of emphasis on the fact that when these first OT8s got home, they went very PTS. They got into accidents. Some of them died. Some of them got sick. Many of them left the church altogether and never came back. So I don't know if he's viewed that or if that's a little bit exaggerated. But I do understand that it didn't make OT8 all bad. People had wins on it. OT8 itself was apparently pretty good for a lot of the people that did it. But there were some disasters, and people have pointed out that it may have been connected to people kind of going PTS to this document, because this document is very, very heavy, and if you read it, and especially if you're a Christian, it's very upsetting.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's like when I first came across it, I'd already been exposed to a lot of information, right? But if I was green, it would really have thrown me off, right? And
yes.
And so anyway, I'd already been exposed to a lot of stuff, especially nowadays. We've got the internet. They didn't have it back then, you know what I mean? So it's just like, anyway, but it really made me go, hold on a second, whoa, was I wrong about Hubbard and Scientology? Because it's like, imagine if L. Ron Hubbard did a lecture and he said water boils at 80 degrees, right? You would go, hold on a second, that's fucked. What we know, water boils at 100 degrees, and it makes you put everything Hubbard says into doubt. So that's what I found this document did to me. It made me put everything into doubt. Like, hold on a second, whoa! And after I read it, I actually thought, this is why they say you shouldn't read the upper level materials and stuff, because you're not ready for them. And I was like, I got some reality on that. But then I just investigated more and looked more. and asked some questions about things more. Like apparently the ancient Greeks, it was very normal for them to practice some form of homosexuality. Like an adult man would take a 13-year-old boy out into the bush or whatever and teach him how to catch an animal and then have sex with him. Like apparently this was going on. I mean, that was like, I don't know why, but they just had a whole different culture back then, right? So then when I investigated it more, I wasn't like Chris Shelton and had a hernia and said, oh my God, Scientology is ridiculous, and just ran off. I thought, no, let's look into this more. You know what I mean? Let me try and understand this OTA briefing, right? And to this day, I'm still investigating it, and I don't know, but I'm not gonna let it put doubt onto all of Hubbard's stuff, because so much of it is good data. Just so much is good data, especially Mission Earth. It's just freaking gold, a gold mine of data. And I like a lot of Alex Jones' data, but that doesn't mean I agree with 100% of what they say. It means that, like, I really like the data that they have, and, like, I find, like, so much of it is true. But anyway, continue.
No, I agree with you, Andy. That's a very good summary, very good statement. There's good and bad. You can see the good and bad in Hubbard from the very beginning. You know, I could go on and on with stories that evidence that he was bad and evidence that he was good. This is why I walk the middle path, and I can't agree with people looking the other way on what Hubbard did and believed and taught that wasn't so good. And I also can't go along with these people who want to trash Hubbard and say that there was nothing good because of these bad things. Then you shouldn't do anything with what he put out, because what he put out was incredible. So this is a very difficult area, Andy. It's almost impossible to get people into agreement on it, and agreement is what builds a group. And we're going to have a fragmented field until everybody's on the same page and caught up and really gets what's good and what's not about Scientology. And I feel like I'm a bit of a pioneer. I'm not the only one. Many people have done this kind of study and look into it and started other groups, or maybe they didn't. Maybe they just got scared away and they finally said, I can't make sense of this. You know, you look at Marty Rathman, you know, there for various reasons. There are many other reasons, but one of the reasons that he's inactive and not taking leadership anymore in the last several years is he got to this point where the OT8 briefing upset him when George White came on his site and said, I was on the first voyage, that document was on my OT8. And that was the other thing I was going to throw in there as another dot to connect. And, you know, I don't blame Marty one bit, you know, and there's a lot of people in that boat, but this is why I went back to the fundamentals in free Scientology and free philosophy and said, you know, this stuff is not hypnosis, is it? You know, and I demonstrated to myself, and I can demonstrate it to others, that no, auditing is not hypnosis. Auditing does some amazing and incredible things, and we can understand why it does what it does if we get into it enough. It's longer than I can go into right here, but I want to tell people that there's a lot of hope for the auditing, and that's why I'm still at this, because you know, I consider myself a Christian. I'm offended by the OT8 student briefing, but at the same time, I don't see it as a whole lot different as some of the other things that Hubbard did throughout his career. He wrote some interesting documents, including brainwashing, and blamed it on the Soviets. It was an interesting controlled opposition that he did in 1955 in Washington, D.C. It's not the first time he's written things like this that were controversial or upsetting, and it doesn't capture all of his character. You know, he was a brilliant man and a master at the mind, and he knew what processes belonged where, and that was his great strength, and that's what makes the red tech volume so valuable, because that's what he put in there. His knowledge of the mind, which was incredible, wherever it came from, which included his own observation of auditing people and case supervising folders, he emerged as the top CS on the planet, the person who knew what it took to get people through all of their aberrations. And that's an incredible feat. And so I'm not going to drop the tech just because I have some disagreements with Hubbard's cosmology or beliefs, which to just summarize everything I've said, back to the Freemasonry thing. This is a common Freemasonry teaching and belief that Lucifer has this role that we're not told in the Bible what it really is, that he and if you go into the Sumerian tablets, Lucifer was Enki, the one who did the genetic engineering of the human race. So technically speaking, if you believe in bodies and you don't believe in spiritual beings, Lucifer made the human race, and you have the brother Enlil, who is Jehovah in the Old Testament, saying that he's your God and you don't want any other gods. And yet these are both alien beings depicted in the Sumerian tablets, carved in stone, for the human race to view later, and became the foundations of the Bible. And so you have all kinds of weird and interesting takes on God that ignore the fact that God permeates the universe, that God is the creative force, that God would never do the kind of things that Jehovah did in the Old Testament, like, ask Abraham to slay his son on the altar, and things, really weird things like that, did not come from the God of this universe. They came from Enki and Enlil, these brothers that were dominating the planet and mining the planet for gold for the Anunnaki. Now, you don't have to believe that story, but it's carved in stone. It's found in all continents of the planet. It's associated with the Great Pyramids and all of the great Stonehenge and all of these other things. These Anunnaki beings were here. They engineered a race that has no connection to Darwinian evolution. There are no primate bones in the human body, period.
And also, I just want to quickly chuck something in as well. I think there's a lot of evidence for Bigfoot existing. So I think a lot of the time they find ancient fossils of Bigfoot or the creature that evolved into Bigfoot, and they say, see, that's the missing link. That's who we evolved from. And it's like, no, that's who Bigfoot evolved from.
And the truth is that Bigfoot is in the Lloyd Pye. Look up Lloyd Pye, LLOYDPYE, and his videos, including the best one is Everything You Know Is Wrong. He proves he's a scientist. He's not a top scientist like a biologist, but he's a scientist and he's grounded in science. And the primate that's native to planet Earth is Bigfoot. We are not native to planet Earth. We are genetically engineered.
Absolutely not, man. It's like freaking ridiculous. Like I have to wear sunglasses outdoors. If I'm there for outdoors for more than an hour, it gives me a headache and shit. Like there's so much evidence for me not being adapted for this place.
Well,
anyway, but I don't want to go off
another that doesn't even come from Lloyd Pye or any of that. It just comes from another scientific study that I saw on the internet. The human body has a 25-hour day. Have you ever wondered why people cannot get a regular sleep cycle going, and it's so hard?
Yeah, that's what happens to me.
I mean, 25-hour day from another planet, and we're on a planet with 24 hours.
I know there's just so much to talk about, but you were talking about, I don't know, maybe we should just continue with what you're saying.
I don't really have any more to say on the OTA briefing because the Jesse Prince data connects the dot with George White, who was there, and says that he read that on the first maiden voyage. And the Jesse Prince earlier affidavit that talks about how worried Miscavige was about releasing this and how they pulled it. I mean, they did what I consider was the right thing. I would have done the same thing. They retired that document. They declared it a forgery. They, which is not true, but it swept the issue under the carpet so that OTA could just be done as a rundown and not as some special briefing that gets people into some inside initiation as to what Hubbard, decided that was his goal and mission and on planet Earth, which he talks about in.
Look, what we're saying is that well, this is what I think. We're saying that Hubbard's OT8, the original one, is so groundbreaking, exposes such a deep truth about Earth, that when people read it, they thought Hubbard was nuts. They thought Scientology was potentially all bullshit, and they thought it wasn't. People think Hubbard didn't even write it. That's how deep it is. This OT8 Jesus document. It's so freaking deep that people read it and they go, I don't believe it. And the reason why I understand this very much is because it reminds me of my Facebook posts where people read them and go, I don't believe that, because it's actually the truth. It's so freaking deep. The truth is so deep. It's so out there that when and the average human is so dumbed down and has the truth so hidden from them, when they actually are hit with the truth, they just go, whoa, and they can't believe it.
There's that possibility, and I want to make one more observation. I really don't have more to say on this except for one more thing. Hubbard lost his son Quentin in 1976 and went into a decline after that. Mentally, he was getting older, and in fact, he was kind of swept when he left the management lines to go and live on his own at a secluded ranch. That was 1980 and 81. And that's when that briefing was written. So Hubbard was under a lot of stress. You could say he was like keyed in at the loss of his son. That's a secondary or a grief engram. And I don't think he ever properly ran it because he was said to have yelled and cursed his son for giving him this problem, and was very upset about it, but never really grieved. So you're looking at somebody who got keyed in back to his earlier Crowley days, where, and that's just my speculation, but and it's not to excuse it at all. It's just to say that people can change and go into a decline. Miscavige went into a big decline and became more and more SP. Hubbard went into a decline just because of his old age and because of his failing health and because of what happened to his son and all the attacks. So, you got to look at Hubbard's, and yet Hubbard did some very brilliant things. As late as 1984, he approved. I don't know that he came up with false purpose rundown, but he certainly read it over and approved it and wrote out some of the issues of false purpose rundown, which is the last tech I believe that was pretty much issued that I know of is 1984 false purpose rundown.
Who do you think wrote it then?
I'm sure that a team of possibly some of Mayo's research and some other teams. And false purpose rundown is basically derived on early Hubbard data about the prior confusion, which was 1956, I think. And in fact, false purpose rundown auditors go back and listen to the Conquest of Chaos lectures. Well, I think the name has been changed in the Golden Age of Knowledge release, but the old tapes were called Conquest of Chaos, and that was the prior confusion technology that is used. So it wasn't like new tech, but it was a new application of tech that's brilliant. And one of the most valuable rundowns and OT rundowns we have in Scientology is the false purpose rundown. And I got to add one more thing. All those crazy sect checks of Joburg, 1961, and some of the other ones that the critics like to laugh about, and especially are bothersome because they say, have you had any unkind thoughts about L. Ron Hubbard? None of that is on the FPRD list. The FPRD lists are very straightforward, very generic. And if you want to do a sect check on somebody, I would go use those lists and not the earlier ones that are a little wacky. You know, the Joburg and some of that is very out PR itself. What it dredges up, and it's very out gradient for a lot of people. So the FPRD is just one of my favorite packs in all Scientology and all the tech. It's just amazing tech and just a golden rundown. And I say this knowing that the FPRD was abused at Flag and amongst top executives. You're not going to hear Chris Shelton or some of these other executives praising the FPRD. And I understand that. It's been abused. But just taken by itself, if you believe in the tech as far as, that it works and want to do the tech, FPRD is vital information.
Yeah. And Chris Shelton is not that bright, and he has too many fixed ideas, so he can't discover the truth about things. Like, for example...
Well, he's a classic case of committed overts on the tech in the name of David Miscavige, compromised his integrity, and now he is justifying that.
Justifying the overts.
He never confronted it. And it's sad.
Yeah.
Because he's a brilliant guy. I mean, he does make some brilliant logical arguments, but it's very selective logic. He doesn't put logic on the good part of the tech. He doesn't weigh in the plus points at all. It's all negative when it comes to the tech.
I think, because I'm studying the data evaluators course at the moment, and it's just like, you just see how people's fixed ideas prevent them from calculating the truth.
Absolutely.
It just gives them. It's like a held down 7 in a calculator. You're always going to come up with the wrong answer because he's always got you can confront him with all these little kiddies that have been harmed by vaccines, and he'll never conclude, oh, maybe the vaccine is harmed. He'll go, there's no scientific studies proving that they're harmed, so therefore vaccines must be good. And it's just like, dude, you can just come up with any study you want. You just have to pay a scientist. Don't you see how scientists can be bribed and corrupted, you moron? You can release tons of thingos saying vaccines are good, or tons of researchers saying chickens are good. You can just produce a million ones like that. Every time you go to do it, you just bribe the person who's doing it. And then when someone does it who you haven't bribed, you get that document and you hide it and you burn it and you assassinate a person. And then it appears like chickens or vaccines are like the best things in the world. Anyway, so with this...
Absolutely right.
With this OTA... Look, this is why... the data evaluators course is just... It's such... Have you studied that?
Yes, I studied this data series. I haven't in the course, but I have really I love that. I was going to say, besides the FPRD being the gold mine of tech, the data series is the gold mine of admin. And it's at the top of the admin scale because it's what you use to evaluate what's right and wrong with things, especially in organizations. And I just want to point out that if you study the logical fallacies, you can find them on the internet. You'll find a few that are not in the data series because they were really not needed for evaluating organization situations, but it can really help straighten out your thinking. And I encourage people who do the data evaluator series to supplement it with some of the other logical fallacies, and man, you've got, as Hubbard pointed out, a new way of thinking, a way of climbing up the ladder and viewing truth, and really getting truth. What LRH points out, truth is what makes the OT, and so the data series is vital. And the data series is what I have used to do free Scientology. It's what Hubbard used to develop Dianetics and Scientology. Because he says so, and he also had the logics way back, and the logics are the basis of a lot of the data series as well. And I did the logics in clay on the free wins on the Perception of Truth course, and that has helped me tremendously in this whole thing, in spotting truth and spotting out points and going in and doing an evaluation and figuring out what's what, because we have to do that on Scientology so that we can tell the difference between what was used to control and to build a cult and a religion and what is used to actually help people, individuals, and groups flourish and prosper. And I got to say, it's most of the tech. That's why the tech has worked so well for so many people. But people have objections to the outpoints, and we should listen to them, and we should look at those, and we should identify what those are, because they're not just always just nattering. There are legitimate objections to things that were done for the org and not for the pre-clear, if you know what I mean.
Mm. And it's like the student hat teaches you how to read something and like understand it. But then I found that the data evaluators course, it enables you to work out whether or not what you've just read is bullshit or not. You know what I mean? So it's like it's like another level, because it's like, yes, you want to be able to read. You want to be able to pick up a book and read it and understand it. You don't want to read a book about apples and then tell everyone you just read a book about tennis. That's just completely bizarre. You want to understand what you're reading. But the Data Evaluators course enables you to read it and work out, is this document you're reading correct information? And so it's extremely important in science and with a book about tennis, because you don't want to read a book about tennis and then be taught all this bullshit about tennis, because then you'll be a bad tennis player. You don't want to read a book about how to audit and it's bullshit information and doesn't teach you the right way to audit. So that's what I've sort of noticed that the Data Evaluators course does, is it enables you to work out, am I reading something that's got good, worthy data in it? And it's interesting because I'm reading this book about Jesus, and they'll have a quote from the Bible or something that Jesus said, and then you can see how they then go and they say what that quote means, but that's just their faulty interpretation of what the quote was. And so it's interesting because you're reading it going, you can evaluate the data of this Jesus book, because you're like, that's a twisted form of logic right there. You're like, where did they pull that conclusion from what they just read, you know? And so that's why it's so deep, because you walk around there in life and you come across data and you come across this and that, and you can suddenly see, like especially on the evening news, where the twist and the faulty data is and all this sort of stuff. Like, for example, I'll just mention this because this is something that happened in the news recently. There was a huge attack on Christians in Sri Lanka, right? All these Christians got killed with bombs and stuff. A very big terrorist attack. In Australia, in the news, they opened with the day that this happened, or the day after that this happened, they opened the news report with a story about two people who drowned at a local beach. And they said, oh, you know, it's so sad. And they go, oh, yeah, the town's in shock that these people drowned. That's a nothing story. That happens every now and then. People drown at beaches, right? And so they opened with that. And then after they opened with that, they then hit with a story about the bombings in Indonesia. And they spent about the same amount of time in Sri Lanka. They spent about the same amount of time on the Sri Lankan stuff as they did with the people who drowned. And there's so much more to the story of the Sri Lankan bombing. And you have to ask the question, why? You know, why does it, because that's not an accident. They sit there and they look at the news, and the most important thing comes first. And so why did they want to relegate this thing to the second news item and then give it not as much time as it needs? When Cardinal Pell, by the way, do you know about Cardinal Pell?
I've heard of him, but...
Well, he was from Melbourne, and he was a top person in the Catholic Church, and he was involved with pedophilia. Yeah. When he got busted a few months ago and got convicted for pedophilia, right, they dedicated the first 15 minutes of the news to all about Cardinal Pell. It was like there was almost no ad breaks. It was just the biggest news thing ever, right? Why did they do that? Why did they do that? Why did they treat the Indonesian thing the way they treated it? And then why did they deal with the Christchurch shooting the way they dealt with, where every day it was front page news? It was like heaps of information about it. There was much more people who died in the Sri Lankan thing, you know, but there's not many articles at all. There's like 1/20th the amount of news coverage on the Sri Lankan thing. So anyway, so these are the sorts of things where you're watching the news and you go, oh, what's this? And you evaluate the data and you go, why are they doing this? And you find out about secret agendas that are being pushed through the news and all this sort of stuff. But anyway, about the Hubbard deteriorating, right? You were sort of suggesting that maybe his ability to put out the truth started to deteriorate around 1980, and maybe that's why the document is so extreme. Correct?
Well, as a possibility that he was kind of keyed in on some whole track identities and because he's talking about his whole track goals and identities in this document, that he wants to come back as a politician, that he was, that he was who he was. And, it's just that, that could have been an influence on him, that he, kind of fell into believing this about himself, because it's a little grandiose what he claimed to be in that document. So,
Yeah, that's an understatement. It's just funny because I think there's nothing little about that document, because it's just like, whoa, it's like, what a briefing, But I mean,
yet he wants to come back as a politician to kind of straighten out some politics in this planet. That didn't make sense, such a huge identity before, and then he's going to collapse into a politician. It never made that much sense to me, but I think it could have been that that's what he wanted to express, and that he was giving you the inside data about his identity as a being, and that's what he believed about himself. He also believed he had been Cecil Rhodes, who was the founder of the New World Order. Ironically, what Scientology was kind of fighting in the Guardian's office and RJ-67. In fact, RJ-67 named some of the followers of Cecil Rhodes that own media as the top 12 SPs on the planet, and yet Hubbard believed he was Cecil Rhodes in an earlier life.
Well, hold on. Sorry, I don't want to.
It's not in HCOBs or books, but it was what he said on the ship. It's in Janice's book, and it's in many other Sea Org members who had talked to him. He believed he was Cecil Rhodes. Yeah. That's why he went to Rhodesia in 1966 to kind of relive that existence and see if he could be an OT by himself with the Rhodesian government, which was connected to British intelligence. And although Hubbard was connected to British intelligence, sometimes, as we know now from the whole Trump thing, intelligence agencies will be at war with each other or in their own department and have their own little fun controlled opposition game where they're running Hubbard out of England, but yet they're trying to protect Hubbard and keep him alive as a operational agent. It was crazy. So I don't know what happened in Rhodesia, but he came home very dejected, other than the fact that everybody went to the airport to accept him back to St. Hill, and he just got right back into being L. Ron Hubbard and a tech teacher. So Rhodesia was kind of a disaster. He had thought he had been Cecil Rhodes, and Cecil Rhodes is one of the biggest SPs that has ever been on the planet, because he designed the New World Order that the SPs are building on. So imagine that. I mean, if Hubbard was Rhodes, as he says he was, and he was an extreme SP on the whole track, so you've got a very conflicted individual in the first place, and I'm not surprised to see him talking about an identity of comparable magnitude in the OT8 student briefing, because he had done that before.
Well, hold on a second, because you open up a can of worms here. I don't know. I'll just say I don't want to go down this track of Cecil Rhodes, but I don't know if he was an SP or not. But didn't Hubbard openly say he supported the idea of having a one world government? Right? Didn't he openly say in his political beliefs he thinks that we should have a one world government and it will be better for the world? Isn't that like in freaking documents you can find, like in a church?
Yes, and it's also in his lecture, International City, on the St. Hill Special.
Exactly, yeah. Now, but also, that doesn't necessarily mean Hubbard was for the New World Order. You see what I mean? Like because the New World Order, when people talk about people who are attacking the New World Order, and I attack it, and the One World Government, people are attacking it because that's a big brother, communist, socialist, one world government where there's where there's TV screens everywhere tracking us and recording us. That's setting up. Like that's like an evil version of a one world government. But it seems like Hubbard was for the cooperative, good version of the one world government.
Yeah, so in this lifetime, he was fighting the Cecil Rhodes model. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about the Cecil Rhodes one, but he was fighting the New World Order, which was starting to get into swing in the 50s and 60s and stuff. He wasn't for it, without a doubt. He was threatening it because he didn't want to have it a big brother.
No, he didn't at all. And he wrote History of Man, warning people about the coming thing that was going to make, I don't remember the quote, but, it's like, the future of this planet is going to make the past look like a Sunday school picnic. It's like, it's pretty brutal what he had envisioned, because he got this stuff from data that people were getting in sessions in Dianetics around Wichita in 1951. He didn't just get it from L. Ron Hubbard Jr. and Mary Sue. He got it from them too, but he had also got it from sessions from his research auditors in Wichita. And basically, they were remembering societies that were completely controlled by electronics. We're looking at 5G rolling out on this planet, and it's a control grid, and it's what Hubbard described and was coming up in sessions in 1951, because people have lived this before.
Totally. I can totally see it, because it's like if you put out energy out of certain towers, it gets people into a certain mode. It's kind of like if you play a sad song on the radio, suddenly everyone, it keys in when they feel sad, like moments that they've had loss or whatever, and then it changes the way they act. But we'll quickly just go into this, but what do you think these towers do and how they work and 5G and stuff? What do you think the deal is with that?
It comes from crowd control military technology, and they're called millimeter waves. And they have the capability of frying a person, creating heart attacks. They already have that capability with 4G, but they have to really amp up the power and use special machines. But 5G will be where they can really control your emotional states by electromagnetic influence, and they can cause deaths, cause cancers, cause a lot of things because of the electromagnetic energy is so strong. Now, I want to point out a datum for Scientologists. Guys who are really grounded in the TRs and have done the Purif or some kind of detox and are aware beings are far less effective. Now, they can still influence you and cause a lot of discomfort physically. I think I've been targeted myself at times, but your body has a lot more power than you grant it, and you also as a being have a lot more power than you grant yourself, and they can't do as much to a aware and awake being as they can to the person who's eating GMO foods and already has an N-mested body, where this N-mest wave can really create a lot of havoc and will control people's moods and all kinds of things.
Yeah, when you got people who have cases or big cases, that if you just put them into that fear frame of mind, like maybe, let's say you're living with them and you drop a spider on them and you get them into that fear state of mind, they're much easier to control. So you keep them in that condition. You keep them low toned and stuff. So maybe this is just technology to keep people in a condition where they can be restimulated. You mentioned in our previous, and also the people who we have controlling this place, they're the sort of people that would use any technology to try and control people. So of course they're going to be like, oh, this sounds fantastic. Yeah, let's put in these towers that keep people acting like this, and let's put this substance in the water that keeps people keyed in and stuff. Anyway, so in the previous interviews we did, you mentioned that you did, when you released the OSA documents, that you seem to have gotten some sort of EMP attack. Is that correct?
I was getting what I felt. I got a lot of things. Strange things happened. But I think I got the night after I released that, I woke up with extreme migraine headaches and the feeling that my body temperature was raising, which is like a microwave radiation type of thing. I felt like I was targeted and like punished for releasing those things.
Okay, did you have 5G internet at your house?
No, and 5G is not online and operational yet. And I want to point out something. They're playing a trick on people. If your internet router says 5G, it does not mean the 5G that's rolling out on the streets in the cities. That's just a 5 gigahertz wavelength. And what they're doing is they're trying to normalize 5G with people by putting that on your new routers. If your router says 5G, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about these stations of antennas that are going to be right out on your street. And because of the wavelength, they have to do these every 100 yards. So they're going to be all over your city. And they're already putting them in certain cities to install these. And it's a very different thing from the 5G that says on your router.
Okay,
so no, this was not 5G. It was just regular microwave that they can generate from the current infrastructure from cell phone towers. They can direct microwave energy at people. And there's a whole body of people who are called targeted individuals who suffer from these kind of attacks. Yeah. Some of them are crazy and mental and you know, but there are whistleblowers who get instruments, people bringing in instruments in their house, and they have incredible amounts of microwave radiation there in their house. So this is being done. It's not a farce. It's not a paranoia.
Yeah, there's an episode of Jesse Ventura's Conspiracy Theory where they talk about this 5G thing and how there's towers that put out this energy, and that they seem to be targeting people who are just not acting like slaves, which obviously you fit into. On my internet and other people's internet in Australia, it seems like the Wi-Fi's are putting out two things: the normal Wi-Fi, whatever that is, 4G, and then there's the 5G option. I always go with the other one because I heard 5G is evil. But what are you saying? Are you saying that this router, even though it has the option, this modem, it has the option of 5G, I'm looking at it now on my computer, it's not actually putting out 5G yet? They'll only start working when they build the towers nearby? Is that what you're saying?
It's a critical difference, and they're hoping to give you a misunderstood by collapsing 5G, two different 5Gs. 5 gigahertz is on your modem router. It's not a lot different from 4G. It's still microwave radiation, but it's not necessarily stronger than the 4G. Sometimes it's faster for people, and they want you to feel good about 5G because what they're putting on 5G is really 5th generation cell phone towers. These are what are going to generate the energy, the quantity of energy that they need to completely start controlling the grid. It's a control grid.
Okay, but they're not built yet. Is that what you're saying? They're not built yet.
Only in major cities are they installing these, and they're running into resistance because people are waking up, and that's a good thing. So there's hope, and I encourage people to get involved and figure out if your city is rolling out 5G and go say something about it, because that's the only way mankind is going to stop this.
Okay, so do you predict that in 10 years' time, the modems won't have this option that doesn't have the 5G, and they'll all just say iPrimus 5G or whatever?
Well, just to back up a little bit, just make sure there's no misunderstood. Your modem cannot generate the 5G energy that they will put on your streets.
Yeah. But what you're saying is that at the moment they're offering, the modem is offering two options. Neither of them are actually really 5G unless you're next to one of these new towers that they've built. And I'm at the moment in a country town. It's probably not got operational 5G, but in the future they'll get operational 5G, and then in 5 years' time they'll stop running the old version of the internet and will only have 5G internet. Is that what you're saying?
I think so. I really don't know a whole lot about those details. Yeah.
Okay, and
what I know is that 5G, 5th generation, that they're trying to install on the streets of the big cities is a military technology. It's a crowd control technology. It's extremely scary. It's not needed. It's not needed for a faster internet. It's not needed for infrastructure. Sadly, Trump is backing it up because it's good for the economy to put a new technology out there. But he's glossed over the health problems because it's going to generate severe health issues and the control factor that the military is using. I don't think people realize how much the military and military intelligence is actually in control of the government and not the government. It's not the government telling the military what to do. It's the other way around.
Yeah. So apparently they used it during the Gulf War or something, and they used it during the Wall Street riots or something, where the police put out some energy and it actually changes the way the rioters behave, and it changed the way the soldiers behaved in the Gulf War.
Yes.
Is this what you're talking about?
Yes, that same kind of technology that they want to install on the streets of America has been used in warfare to radically alter people's emotional states, to create pain, sensations of pain, sensations of burning, to disperse crowds, to get enemy soldiers to surrender. Yes, it's a scary technology.
And you reckon you've experienced this?
No, I've experienced just high concentrations of directed microwave radiation, which any other whistleblower has as well.
No, but isn't that the same thing? Isn't that the same thing? Isn't that the same thing? You're saying you release the OSA documents and you...
It's similar. It's similar, but you got to understand that what we're using now for internet is basically microwave type radiation. 5G is a different kind of wave. The 5th generation is a millimeter wave, and it behaves differently, and it does far more powerful things against bodies and against but they've been able to do similar things with the existing infrastructure. That's all I'm saying. It's just harder for them to do. They can't control everybody. They can only directly target certain individuals that they want to suffer a little or be confused because they're in such a dirty energy of microwave, that kind of thing. And I want to tell you, Andy, I don't know what happened or whether I have an angel on my shoulder, but in the last several weeks, I've not experienced any of this kind of reaction, bodily reaction that I was having, getting migraines and things like that over what I thought could have been microwave radiation, because my body would heat up either in my chest area or my head area. It was never the same. It was one or the other.
It sounds somewhat... Sorry, keep on going.
Well, for some reason, I experienced this when I was living down in Argentina, December, January, and February, especially in January. I was sick every other day from this stuff.
It sounds like you're a targeted individual. Sorry, it just sounds so much like you're a targeted individual. Have you seen the Jesse Ventura episode?
Yeah, I feel that that's a strong possibility, and I have handled it in my own way. I've actually done solo sessions on this and other type of energy work where I have overcome it. And that's what I'm saying. For the last several weeks, my body has been somewhat immune to this, or the plans changed and I'm no longer targeted in that way. I'm targeted in other ways. I can tell you some other stories, but I really don't want to because it's kind of personal. But all I'm saying is I'm still going, and I'm not going to stop, and I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. But I have gone through some suffering, and I've gone through a lot of it's been very hard to get to the point where I am, where I'm apparently not effective as I was before. And a lot of that had to do with some auditing that I did.
So the auditing has helped you with being a targeted individual.
Yeah, and I'll tell, for the Scientologists out there and the auditors, I'll summarize it. When you get the date locate technology, it's really not date because you know it's happening right now. But when you can locate where it's coming from, the being keys out and really rises above it and locates the attack and where it's coming from and what type of attack. All you have to do is make a list for yourself, assess it on the meter, get your item. And this is what I did. And it's basically standard tech, listing and nulling, what's going on, where is it coming from. And when you date and locate that kind of thing, you can key it out, and you as a being are no longer effective at. The PTSSP tech in that sense, the S&D, search and discovery, is extremely powerful and very helpful. So I've applied it to myself solo, and it's been a great help.
That's great. And so I've got a question about this. So we're talking about this sort of electronic 5G waves, energy technology, EMF. We're talking about this way to target individuals. Do you know if they use entities to target individuals as well?
Well, I have to point out that Jeffrey Augustine was interviewing John Atack, the author of A Piece of Blue Sky. They went into the fact that it's known as a technology in Freemasonry that you wrap a spell in an entity and you send it to the person. And yes, they were talking about that as if it was almost normal. Jeffrey was specifically. I think this is a little over John Atack's head, because although he's done knots and he could relate to it, they were talking about how black knots was real. It wasn't a made up thing. And these are attackers. These are people who are denigrating the tech. So, just listen to them. And I haven't done the upper levels, and I don't, but I can tell you, Andy, that when I do an assessment on myself, I check for that thing, and I know enough about it that I can handle it on myself. So I've done that, and it's been very helpful. And I didn't want to say it, but since you pointed it out, that came up as they were first trying. And once I isolated where it was coming from, sometimes in some cases who it was coming from, oops, I'm not going to name names, but they know who they are. That kind of thing, this is an old technology, Andy, the technology of black magic and defending against black magic. When you can identify who is doing it and who is sending it, it recoils on the person, and they don't attack you again because it hits them instead of you.
How would I know if I'm getting some of these attacks, whether it's the BT one or it's the 5G targeted individual electronic attack?
That's a very tough question to answer, Andy, because I would get you into learning solo auditing. At the same time, you would be fighting with the temptation to try this out on yourself, because you're wanting to know. It's normal to want to know what's going on and to try to use the e-meter to try to sort it out. So if you were very disciplined, though, and said, no, I'm going to get through my solo courses and maybe do some of the upper levels or something as a training, or at least do some solo work on yourself in other areas that's really light, and hold that off for a while and become an accomplished solo auditor, because I've had some years of experience doing this, then yes, you can begin to use the e-meter as a defensive tool in that way and sort out where things are coming from. And it's great, let me tell you, when you can get in that state where you can actually foil a spiritual attack by sorting it out. Others have different ways. Psychics use different perceptions and things like that. Some people use a pendulum. But it's not easy. It's not easy, and it's very tempting to want to know more than you should. You know what I'm saying? So it really challenges the being to be extremely ethical with what you're doing, because you can't be using this to get more information than what you need to defend yourself. That's all I can say.
Okay, well I don't know.
That's been a principle of ethical magic for millennia, okay? That you harm nobody, and that you only access the what do you call it? The collective unconscious, maybe, or the collective, what we would call the seventh dynamic, the spiritual universe. You only access it as much as you really need, unless you're really up there in ethical and spiritual abilities so that you can handle these things without falling into these traps. Because there are traps and temptations to use this in ways that are not ethical. That's all I can say.
Okay.
I really am not an expert on this. I have read a lot of books and learned from a lot of people, but I am an accomplished solo auditor, and I've been able to use the e-meter where other people may use a pendulum or certain other instruments or just their intuition to do the same kind of thing.
Where are you on the bridge?
And, I'm a clear, and I've got that state acknowledged outside the church. I couldn't get it acknowledged inside the church because of the Miscavige new plan, to invalidate the state of clear. But I went back. I wanted to do my grades before I went further than clear on the upper levels. And so I did the grades very slowly and thoroughly over a period of several years.
Yeah, can I just say, as a lot of people who are listening...
I'm near grade 3. That's where I am.
Yeah, I think that when you do objectives properly and when you do the grades properly, I mean, you get this product, which is like a being that can see the truth, that can like look and calculate it and stuff. And this GAT2 is just producing quickie grades, and other people just don't even do the grades and they get pronounced clear. I just disagree with that stuff, but I just think that you get some interesting beings, and you get people who are really onto the truth, who do these things properly, and there's no rush. There's no need to, like, I think as a status symbol, people are like, they want to be OT3 or OT5 or something, but it's just like, no, what's more important is if whatever you've done, you've done it properly and you've taken your time. But anyway, with me case-wise though, I don't notice electronic attacks and stuff. But I have noticed moments where like I get addicted to ice cream, and I have like moments where I'm obviously keyed in, but I'm not like super keyed in, but like I'm just not operating to my full abilities. Like I'll just like have to go to and rush to McDonald's or something like that. And so I don't know what that is, but I might find out that I could be going through periods where, I'm getting some sort of attack and it just leads me to just eat too much food for dinner.
Yeah, it's what it is. It's a dirty energy in your space. It's N theta, and it doesn't feel comfortable, and it can affect the body in various ways. So yeah, I feel for you because I know how that feels too. So it's like, it's not cool, the people that are doing this, at all. It's really, bottom line, it's black magic, black knots, however you want to put it. It's not good.
Yeah, it's interesting. And also, I think I noticed as well that I have to do my spiritual stuff. Like, like I practice like a bit of TR0 and stuff, but like I have to do these things. Otherwise, I can just see myself getting keyed in. See, and what I could be doing, because I wear crystals as well, like this stuff here, that affects electromagnetic stuff and radiation and shit. So I do these things, and I'm probably keeping my head above the water and actually stopping myself from being affected by all those things. But I do notice that when I drop these things off, that I do start being keyed in, and I do start noticing like I can't operate as well. Yeah. And I would agree, TR0 is probably the most recommended thing here, because when you got your TR0 in, they cannot get you. Yeah. And even Captain Bill pointed that out. Even psychotronics that they've done from satellites and things like that. He said, if your TR0 is in, it just rebounds on the sender, just like I was pointing out. You don't really have to do a metered handling, which is better when you do that. It's kind of fun, and it's really a bigger key out. But just on a lower level, or on a level before you can do solo auditing, to have your TR0 really in is probably the best advice I could give anybody. Yeah, and these things you should do regardless of if you're getting targeted or not. It's just like, these are just because everyone to a certain degree is getting targeted. Everyone is the environment in the modern Western society is designed to key them in and stop them from operating as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So do you know anything about MARCABs interfering with people's cases, or do you know anything about MARCABs in general?
No, I'm afraid I don't. I have tried to focus on free Scientology and the tech and tried to completely disassociate myself from any cosmology, whether Captain Bill's or LRH's. It's not that I don't think there's value in that, and some people are into that, and that's okay with me. It's just that personally I don't delve into cosmology. I try to go actually earlier on the track to the very beginning, and that's what my free philosophy project is I spend my time and my meditation and my mind is at the very beginning incident and how theta developed patterns and things like that. And that is a very exciting research because it's very fundamental. And I've run whole track, when I did NED and stuff. I didn't do a whole lot of space opera. It was very early stuff. But I have run some implants and things like that, and they're real to me. So the answer is I don't know much about the Markabian thing or the cosmology, whether it's Captain Bill's or LRH's. I just put that aside until I do a little more advancement, and then I want to kind of remember a lot of this stuff myself without evaluation. So that's another reason.
Okay, well, what about do you know about aliens here on Earth or aliens that look like us here on Earth?
I believe that's a high probability. There's literally 1 million planets in this universe that can support life, and there's people, there's technologies that are alien technologies. We've obviously been genetically engineered by a highly advanced race. Human body has. And I have no problem believing in aliens. I just don't spend a lot of time contemplating or worrying about it. One of the things that helped me a lot is when I really got my TR0 in and acknowledged myself as a being after doing the PTSSP course for the second time, Golden Age Attack, which wasn't bad. It's a good way to do the PTSSP course. It may not be good for, say, Auditor Class 3, but it's good for certain courses. And I really got the sensation that I was equal as a being to any other being in this universe, and all I needed to do was rise to the occasion and match their energy, and I could protect myself in any situation. That doesn't mean that they can't take my body out with a laser or something like that. I'm not saying I'm invulnerable. I'm just saying I feel pretty safe, and I feel like I could confront any being. And alien beings are not different from animals or humans. Maybe I shouldn't have said animals, because not every animal has maybe a spiritual being, but some of them are. And different varieties I'm just talking about different varieties of spiritual beings because of their experience track, their in present time, not necessarily stronger than you as a being. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to get at that there's a fundamental equality among spiritual beings in terms of potential. And we all use our potentials at different levels because we're holding ourselves back. We have cases. We play games with ourselves. We play games with our dynamics. We're fighting our dynamics and ourselves. But aliens may be more advanced technologically, but that doesn't mean they're better beings or necessarily, we all have the same quantity of time on our track. Some of us have taken longer timeouts than others, and some of us have a long way to go in developing. But I see the whole alien thing as I'm not really worried about it because I feel like I could communicate with them. I feel like I could defend myself spiritually from them. There's nothing that they could really do to me. And I feel like there's as many good ones or more good ones than there are bad ones. So I'm not really afraid. I don't spend a lot of time worrying about it.
All right. And so getting back to this OT8 briefing, I just wanted to mention about the Hubbard deteriorating thing. I'm sure in the last year of his life, maybe 85, he was written off, basically. Maybe in 79, I heard he had some cancer removed from his head, so there would have been a month or two where he was written off. But I think that he had his marbles all the way up until 85, because I'm reading Mission Earth, and he is just so smart, and he lays down the history of Earth in a fiction book, and he lays down what's going on in the modern 20th century in Western society. He lays it down in this fiction book, and it's just so intelligent. It's correct. You know, like there'll be like a character that's from the FBI, and then he'll go over like the history of the FBI and stuff, but he's just like so right and so intelligent. And so I just don't think that I don't think he was releasing crappy data. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I know where you're coming from. Realize this, that Von Young was a co-writer of Mission Earth. He wasn't acknowledged, but he took some of the outlines of plots and he wrote as if he was Hubbard, and he was pretty good at mimicking Hubbard. I'm not saying these ideas came from Von Young. I think they originated from L. Ron Hubbard, and the whole idea of Mission Earth and the ideas that are put out there were from LRH. But Von Young did a lot of the writing. You can find his stories on the internet about that. And, Hubbard in his later years, I think he went back and forth from lucidity to being keyed in and kind of getting old and maybe a little bit of dementia setting in. I don't remember what year he finished Mission Earth. Was that 85 or 84?
I don't know, but I mean, how are we going to know? Because he could have finished it and they could have released it 2 years after he finished it. I mean, who knows? But it seems, but from my investigation, it seems like he wrote Battlefield Earth around 80, 81 and started writing Mission Earth around 81, 82.
I think you're right about that, and I think he really went into it when he couldn't get the all clear from the Miscavige team. He got mad at them, and it's in Jesse Prince's book, and he actually disconnected from management. He said, "You are a bunch of SPs." And he stopped communicating for a while, and he really went into his book.
Yes. Now, hold on. When did he get angry with management? What year is that? Do you know?
I'd have to go back to his book, but I think it was either 83 or 84.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. For me, 83, it makes sense because you notice the amount of PLs that get released, they cut off in 83. They really die down. And so I'm not one of these people who think that Hubbard died in the 70s or anything. No. I totally think that in 82, the church got fully taken over by Miscavige and the government and stuff. And Hubbard was smart because he wrote the data evaluators course and he could see that comms were getting changed and stuff. And he said, stuff them, I'm writing my Mission Earth.
Yeah. I don't believe in a second Hubbard either. And if there was a second Hubbard, it would have been January 1965 because that's when everything changed radically. Radically.
All right. Okay, so... Okay, anyway, yeah, so with that OTA document, the reason why I put some attention on it and stuff is because I read it and my intuition said that there's something to this. Because to me it made sense. I was like, okay, I can get it. Yeah, the Kabbalah and the the Freemasonry saying that Jesus isn't really good and stuff, and William Cooper said how to get to a certain level in Freemasonry you have to say that you spit on the cross or something like that, and that you basically got to come to that cognition. It seems like you do your Freemason levels and you come to the cognition that Christianity is actually not good. And I don't know. I just thought it, and it sounded, to me, it sounded so much like L. Ron Hubbard, the way it was written. I was like, well, whoever's impersonated Hubbard, they really captured that way that Hubbard expresses himself, where you have to read it over and over again to go, what the hell is he saying? Because Hubbard doesn't express himself in an easy to understand way. You know, I noticed that, especially studying the data evaluators course, you know, you read a paragraph and you're like, what's he talking about? Because he really uses words in a fancy way, and he's from a whole different generation where they express themselves in a different way, and he's talking about data that's so out there that it's just really hard to understand. But anyway, I think maybe we've finished that topic, but it's good to speak to you about that you're leaning towards it actually being a genuine document, because at the moment I'm leaning towards that as well, and I'm going to keep on investigating it. But to me, you know, I think that's real, you know, and I get why Hubbard would want to become a politician in his next life, because he looked at the world and said, hold on a second, things are so fucked up, you know, with the New World Order, all this shit. It's just like, we can't even get a church started if they're going to be spraying the sky with chemicals, and if they're going to be pumping vaccines full of crap that just brainwashes kids. It's like, no. You need to just, you need to just correct the freaking game, almost become a dictator or something, and just get into power and just go, whoa, fix all this shit up, because it's just like, I can't just keep on coming up with new tech, right, from Hubbard's point of view. He can't just keep on coming up with new tech to combat all the kids that have gotten autism from vaccines, and then come up with new tech to combat the chemicals that are getting sprayed in the sky. You know what I mean? And that's why OTs, I mean, of course they're going to struggle, because there's all this shit in their environment. You know what I mean? Yes, they've got wins from the tech, but don't expect someone to be clear to be walking around feeling fantastic, because there's freaking chemicals in the water. You know, there's freaking more stuff getting sprayed on our skies that affect people. And it's just like Hubbard never said going clear or OT would stop you from being affected by poisons, you know? So this is why some people like Chris Shelton might badmouth the tech and say, look, this OT isn't acting like an OT. And it's just like, no, he's not acting like an OT because there's so many more things stopping him from being OT.
Great points. I agree totally, Andy.
People don't know this. People don't know that. I mean, I watch them actually spray the sky. I can see them spray. Yeah. I can see the effect it has, and we're breathing that stuff in. You know, and not only that, if you're driving amongst peak hour traffic and you've got your window down, there's car fumes. I mean, you're breathing in petrol fumes and stuff. I mean, that's going to affect you as well, you know?
Yeah.
So it's just
That's
wild.
a great point, Andy. And this planet is in a crisis. And if you study the expanded Dianetics series and you go into the metallosis rundown, you realize that certain metals, especially heavy metals, key in evil purposes.
Wow.
And they're spraying the sky with what? Aluminum and barium.
Yes, heavy metals.
They're injecting you with vaccines that have mercury.
Metals. Yeah.
They've got fluoride in your water. The diesel fumes have lead and other chromium and other heavy metal toxins. People are getting keyed into their evil purposes, and you see them dramatizing it left, right, and center. And whether it's the loony left or it's the radical right, you've got people who are out ethics, who are dramatizing evil intentions. They're committing acts of violence and desperation, and it's not going to help the situation. As you know, it creates more chaos and disorder. And what they're doing is they're sowing the seeds of chaos and disorder by pumping heavy metals in our environment. That keys in beings, and these beings get keyed in on their evil purposes. That's straight out of expanded Dianetics.
All right. So that was the interview, part 1. Part 2 is coming. And a few months after that, I'll get on to part 3. But what a cool interview. I think it was. I'm rating that up there. I'm going to nominate it for interview of non-Scientology, because I know, like, we didn't talk too much about Scientology. Like, yes, there was references to Scientology, but what I liked about it was how it was like stuff in the outside world relating to Scientology, and I liked how it was very out of the box, like out of the Scientology world, but at the same time in the Scientology world. So I'm nominating that for one of the best interviews, not specifically on Scientology. And there's an interview, I've done ages ago now, and maybe it was the first one with Jonathan Burke from the Advanced Organization of the Great Plains. I nominate that as one of the top ones for specifically Scientology related. But, yeah, so I'll put them in different categories. Like even when I do an interview on flying saucers, Scott's interview we just did, I'm going to put that in that category of the flying saucer one where it was just like not really Scientology related. But that was cool because I was expecting it to be, more Scientology stuff, and but that'll be in the next interview. And part 3 will be the all about the Scientology dramas and that. But anyway, that was cool. Now it's time to end off the podcast. But before I end off, I've got to end off with an LRH quote. Pure Melbourne style. This quote is good, and again, synchronicity. It relates to the interview by accident. I barely even read it before I chose to use this quote in this podcast episode because I wanted to be excited by it. This is from Dianetics 55 by L. Ron Hubbard. It says, anyone who knows the structure, function, and dynamics of the human mind is very difficult to control. The only way a mind can be controlled is by enforcing upon it ignorance of itself. Oh, nice quote. Nice quote. I mean, that gets to the bottom of all this fake news and government propaganda and all this bullcrap. And by the way, when I use the word fake news, I'm not saying Sandy Hook is a conspiracy theory. I'm not classifying that as fake news. I'm classifying fake news as what's on the news just every single day. It's constant manipulations done by one journalists and stuff, and it's just full of so much lies. Like, for example, they'll cut to a weatherman and he'll say he's at a certain location. He's actually lying. It's like green screened. He's not even at that location. I mean, that's where I'm talking about the fake news. Like, it just goes so wild. Like, it's just constant lying. Constant. And I know it's not important whether or not Joe the weatherman is actually at some pond, but I think it's important because you're looking at it and it can trick what you perceive as being real. So then in the future, there could be something really evil, something shifty lie going on, and you see the footage and you go, nah, it looks like that person's at that location. And like you believe it all as being real. But if you knew that pond location from years earlier was fake, then you'd be able to learn how to spot when green screens are being used. And then in the future, when green screens are used in propaganda, you can see through the propaganda. Anyway, this is why I don't like any lie, because any little lie or confusion, it twists things, and then it causes no goodness. No good. But that quote was really good. And that's the thing, because essentially they're keeping people ignorant of themselves or the truth about life. And they're keeping people dumbed down. So it's not just that they're running anti-gun propaganda when some New Zealand guy shoots up a mosque or whatever. Like they run that propaganda. It's not just that. It's probably coming before that is the fact that they make a person ignorant of who they are themselves and their own mind and how it works and stuff. You just got to keep someone really, really dumb, and then they're much easier to control and they'll believe propaganda. You know? Anyway, I'll read it again. You know, you got to read LIH twice. I actually do that as a habit with my studying from now on, unless I'm a little bit pressured for time. But what I do is I read things, like I study something, right, and I use word clearing and study tech, and I read the policy letter. But then now that I've read it, I read it again so that now it's like it'll be easier because I already sort of cleared the words, and now I know what the whole topic of the PL was about, because L1 Hubbard can be difficult to follow. So then I listen to it all again. And what's good about that again is it gets it to sink in, and I get to understand it more, and I get more insight. And if I did if I did accidentally skip an MU, then it comes up that second time through. So I found that that's a really good way of studying. It's kind of like cleaning a window. You know what I mean? Like, let's say you got a window and it's clean, like it's already pretty clean. You can just clean it once and then walk off, and it's probably going to be pretty much spotless. But if the window's pretty dirty, you know, it's got lots of MUs, it's got lots of things that you need to think about and try and understand and go, what the hell is he talking about? You know, 1963, Cuban thing, JFK. Like, you have to think of, like, you have to transport your mind back to the time that L. Ron Hubbard was writing this stuff. You know what I mean? To understand it, right? So when you're studying L. Ron Hubbard's material, it's like a really dirty window. You know, you got to clean it once, and then you probably miss some spots. You know, you're going to have to clean it again. You know, and then you'll really have a clean window. And so with a PL by L. Ron Hubbard, you've got to read it twice. You know, I think that's the best way to do it. Yeah, I totally recommend that. I mean, he's just it's such a mind exercise to try and follow along with him, I find. Especially I'm doing a data evaluators course, and it's just like, whoa, like he really gets you to think, and you're just like, you know, it's not like reading Sal went to the shops and bought an apple, and then she went and threw a ball to her dog. That's easy to read. You don't need to listen to that twice. You don't need to look up any words. But you read L. Ron Hubbard and you're like, whoa, he's so colourful. And it's not just that he's colourful, right, with the fancy words and the fancy, unique way of expressing, and also talking about stuff from like 60 years ago, so you're not in that universe at all. So like you have to know all this shit about history to understand what politics were like in the 60s, you know. If you were around in the 60s and you were following politics, it would be a lot easier, you know. But you're like a whole different generation. You have no idea what these things are, like the Bay of Pigs or whatever. And you have to go in and like find these things out. You have to basically educate yourself on world history in order just to understand what L. Ron Hubbard is talking about, you know. Not only is those things that I mentioned, but also on top of that, he's actually talking about complex things. So he's talking about deep things, and then you've got the colourful language and the words and stuff, and then you've got the out of context, it being like 60 years ago, and you've got all that. So then when it comes to reading, you can't read it easily. It's not easy to read. Anyway, but sadly that's how it is. But what's good is that every time you're reading it, and if it's hard, it's just showing that you're exercising your mind, you're thinking, you're pumping that mind muscle. You see what I mean? And that's what Scientologists really are. They're like gym junkies of thought and philosophy and words. You know what I mean? Like, you got all these gym junkies out there because it's been allowed to be popular by the powers that be. And they go there and they pump steroids and they pump weights and that. And there's some girls going around with these really fantastic bodies and that, because they're these really fit ones and stuff. Like, I don't like muscular one, like badly muscular, but like this good muscular, this toned one. It's really quite attractive. I've just noticed it, like the athletic chicks, you know. It's different to the yoga chicks. Like, it's this muscle thing. It's just like, whoa, it just really gets my body going. But anyway, so all these people, like, it's just like you see these 24-hour fitness gyms and all this sort of stuff everywhere. Like, I don't know if it's like that in America, but it's just like The gyms just exploded. Just all these gyms everywhere. So all these people are exercising their muscles. You know what I mean? But they're not exercising their brain muscle. You know? None of that's going on. But in Scientology, with these mind exercises, with study tech and reading LHPLs, I mean, he's really exercising your mind and giving you that ability to think. You know, and people are going in there doing it every day. I mean, they're exercising their mind. They're thinking this. They're thinking. And that's why Scientologists don't get conned as easily, because they can see through things and stuff, and their mind's been really exercised. They've been using, I call it the part of the mind it's thinking. Because, look, you think of mainstream education, right? That doesn't get you to think. That just gets you to memorize and then spew answers out. It's like that's basically what it, and also give you some propaganda as well. But it doesn't get you to think. It doesn't give you a question and say, no, actually, Jim, I'm going to do something that makes you think. Like, you're going to have to think now. You have to use this part of your brain called thinking and working something out and calculating and stuff. That part of the mind doesn't get exercised, and it's very weak. It's kind of like my six-pack. I've never naturally had a six-pack. It's just not a thing for me. And when I went to start trying to do sit-ups and stuff, and years ago when I was sort of into doing gym and that, you know, other people just had much better stomach muscles than me. Like, look better. You can actually sort of see muscles there. They could actually do sit-ups, and I was like this weak, horrible when it came to the six-pack. I just did not have anything there. It was like the muscles had just faded away from lack of use or whatever, right? So our brains are like the same. They've been fizzled, and like the muscle, that thinking part of the mind, that using that ability to go into that thing has been faded and weakened and gone away. And so then you go to read L. Ron Hubbard and you're like, oh, what is he saying? Oh, you know, and it's just like, That's what it's like. It's like you're having to now use your six-pack muscle. You're having to now bench press, you know, and you're like, whoa, this is too much. And sometimes, you know, when you hit people with data that's just too much for them, it's like getting them to do 300 pounds on a bench press, and it just falls on them and crushes them and like almost kills them. You know, it doesn't kill them, but like it puts them off because they're just like, whoa, it's too much. Like, it just like their brain can't think with it. It's just too deep, right? That's why you got to do Scientology on a gradient, and you got to work your way up to harder courses and stuff. But every time, you know, I go to study Scientology and I find it hard. Firstly, it's gotten much easier as I've gone on, and you get better at doing study tech, and you become much more smarter, and you know more about history, and you understand more about how L. Ron Hubbard expresses himself, so you can duplicate him better. But it's still not easy. It's still not a walk in the park. It's still not Sally went to the shops and bought an apple, and then in the afternoon she rode a bike. But like, a part of me is just like, I wish L. Ron Hubbard wrote in a simple way. You know what I mean? Like, I wish it was like that, because I could just sit down and read stuff and not have to reread and not have to take ages. But this is how it is. This is how it came out of his mouth. You know? He seemed to be in a hurry. Everything he did seemed to be in a hurry. He had a lot to do while he was here. So we've just been left with these funky things where he's just oozing out his expressions and stuff in his funky way, and you're like, oh my God, I'm trying to understand what's he saying. What the hell is he saying? You know what I mean? And he uses all these words, and you're just like, what the fuck? You know? But the positive of it is that at least we've got this information, and also when you go to read it, at least you're exercising that part of your mind. So then when you go out there in the real world and you use it, you listen to a lawyer speak or something else and stuff, it's much easier, you know what I mean, to get along out there in the world, to read other things, you know what I mean? and you're exercising that ability, you know, that thinking ability. So it becomes real strong. So you've got these people like Scott Gordon that has a big thinking ability, you know. It's much more important than a big six-pack, you know, or a big bicep. It's much more important because this is a war for your mind. This is what it is. This is what we have moved beyond being gorillas. If it was gorillas, then I'd say get in there and just pump weights and take steroids so you get these massive muscles and learn how to fight the best ever. And that's it. That's what the game is. You've got to get their big muscles, you know, go get them, go. But we've evolved beyond that. This is why we haven't had a proper battle since like World War II. The wars since then have just been little joke wars for people to make money off weapons and to also keep our busy occupied with a pretend enemy so they invent new inventions, and it keeps them, you know, their military inspired. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, if a person stops pumping weights, then after a month all their muscles go away. So they've kept wars going on. So like little ones on the side, like the Korea and the Vietnam one and these silly terrorist thingos and stuff in the Middle East, they've kept these things going so the military's muscles are still being exercised and they can test out new technology on the battlefield. And, you know, that's why they're keeping it, you know what I mean? But anyway, sorry, I forgot what I was going to say. But yeah, we've moved beyond actual physical battle, you know. We're not gorillas. We've moved beyond that. We're not primitive man. Now it's all intellectual and it's a mind war and it's intelligence and it's what you know. That's what the elite are about. That's what the top bankers are about. You have a battle with a top banker, you're not going to be having a fist fight. You're going to be having some sort of big legal thing or some sort of special new advanced mind control technology being used on you. Or it's gone outside of just physically punching people or using a gun. It's just completely stupid. Anyway. So that's where the game is, you know, and that's why they want you to go in and go to these 24-hour gyms and be distracted by all that so that you don't become a mind fighter. You know what I mean? And that's what Scientology really produces. It produces smart beings, you know, and they're very difficult to control. So just read out this quote again. Anyone who knows the structure, function, and dynamics of the human mind is very difficult to control. The only way a mind can be controlled is by enforcing upon it ignorance of itself. So that's it for today's show. It's time for you to climb back out of this rabbit hole, out of this interesting Scientology world. Thanks for listening. I've been your host, Andy Nolch, the Space Cowboy. You have been listening to the Indie Scientology podcast. So remember, what you thought was impossible is possible.